Hey there, I wanted to share a little story. And this is a story I wrote about recently in my blog and my newsletter. And it's really the story of a house. But it's more than that. I want to talk today about what we create, how we share is something that is in transformation. And I want to illustrate that point by sharing the story of this house that 5 generations of a family lived in. So we're in a moment right now where every moment of every day, it feels like how we do everything is being completely reinvented. Of course, there are many people who are suffering and who are trying to help. And of course, that is always the most important thing. And for a lot of us who are home, who are, trying to not do anything, we are left with what it is we create and how we do that. And it reminds me of a concept I've been thinking a lot about, which is the before and the after. Right now, we are sort of in the middle of these two things. The before, even a couple of weeks ago, feels like an eternity ago, because right now we can't, depending on your own choices in life, we can't go outside. We can't go to a dinner party. We can't go to a concert. And it makes you think about the before in a very different way. And the after is something that is a big question mark. We don't know when or where or what or if or anything about what the after will look like. So I kept thinking about this last week. About a decade ago in 2010, I noticed this house that was having an estate sale. I'd walked past this house many times in the past, and it was in a really beautiful neighborhood, big houses. And then you get to this house, and this house was shielded by shrubs, by trees. So it was behind that. And this was a nice neighborhood where it was not uncommon to see, in the driveways, all these BMWs and Volvos and Mercedes. And this house just had, very, regular cars, and they were maybe a little older, a little more rundown. And it was a mystery. And when I saw the house was for sale, I looked it up and saw they're having an estate sale. And there were all these photos online, and oh my gosh, I just my brain exploded, because what I saw in these photos were just incredible. It was basically, it looked like the house had stood still in time. All of the furnishings, all of the belongings were all from the early part of the 20th century. It was amazing. So I got obsessed, and I looked up the name of the owner of the house, and then I did a lot of online searching and found a phone number just, through the internet. And I called. And I said, look, I see that you're about to sell everything off. I see your house is for sale. Could I come over and just tour the house and document it? That's all. I actually don't even know if I sort of talked about how many photos I was going to take or not. And I just said, I'm curious, I like old things. And they said yes, which I thought was really nice. They were in the process of selling it, so maybe he just saw it as an opportunity to spread the word. So again, this is in 2010. This is a month after our first son was born. And I remember going out there, I think it was maybe, a Thursday night, because it was right before the estate sale. And I remember leaving and being like, all right, I'm leaving at night, my newborn, my wife, and I'm going to this strange big house. I felt a little risky. What I found was really amazing. I mean, this is stuff I dream about. It really was this house that sort of stood still in time. So when I went there, here's a photo of the house after it was renovated, so you can kind of see what it looked like, compare it to what I had seen pulling up to the driveway and walking into the house at night. When you went in, it was It was gorgeous. It was not just an old home that had beautiful old woodwork, which of course it was, had that kind of early 20th century craftsmanship. This is a house that I later learned was built in 1908. And what I learned really quickly was that the same family had lived in this home since 1922. The owner, the person who was welcoming me into their home, he grew up here. It was his grandparents who had bought the house in 1922. His grandfather was the president, I believe, of a bank, and was the person who sort of was in charge of that bank as they went through the stock market crash and helped the bank kind of survive that. I learned later as well that his grandmother lived to be 106 years old, I believe, which is incredible. As you walked around the house, it wasn't just that you saw an old home and old furnishings. All of the details, it was almost as if you'd walked back into 1948 or 1928 or 1958. There was an organ, a beautiful old organ right next to the mantle. There were portraits of the grandfather and grandmother in the living room. Much of the furniture was very old. There are paintings in the dining room that were from the original owner, so the one who lived in the house before the 1920s that woman had painted. They still hung in the dining room. And everywhere there was details. There was interesting, I'll kind of go through it. I'll go tough. Just these, old, the sad puppy dog photo from, I think, the 60s. Those are really popular. Old radios everywhere. A photo of, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Cigarette cases and old purses. Everything, table full of doilies and napkins. It was just incredible. I took so many photos. And he told me about living, growing up here, and he gave me the tour. We went through the whole first floor, and I'm asking every detail. The second floor, the third floor, and there are 3 full floors, this amazing staircase. I wasn't allowed to go in the basement. I kept asking, and he wouldn't let me. Because I was just so amazed at what would you find in a house where 3 huge floors were unchanged for decades. What did that basement look like? I still wonder about that. But of course, I want to respect their privacy and respect his wishes. It's his home, not mine. So the story is that it was being sold, and it was then gut renovated. And I remember driving by the house maybe a year later, and what I saw, I've got to find the photo, but what I saw was that the outside house was unchanged, but everything else was out. So the windows were gone, and you could see the walls were gone. They really had to take this thing down to the core. And you look at the before and after photos, and they're quite shocking. If you look at just the after photos, you would say, wow, what a beautiful, tastefully redone home. It's maybe a little too neutral for your taste or a little too modern for your taste or whatever, but you'd say, this is beautiful. Look at this fireplace, these big rooms, the rooms flow into each other. It makes sense. It's a very high-end, comfortable home. This is the dining room. You'd say, this looks lovely. But when you compare it to the before, you see the choices they had to make. So what you see here is they didn't just make this beautiful stone fireplace. They had to rip off this, what I call this arts and crafts, I think. Arts and crafts, original fireplace. All this woodwork, all this beautiful beams. And everywhere there's this leaded glass you see in this kind of doorway over here. It was all throughout the house. This room in the background here, it's hard to see, but it was tile with these interesting curved windows. And you can see here it's white tile, and then in this area the tile had fallen off. So that's clearly a problem. Here's the organ. This is the dining room. Might be hard to see. Here's the dining room today, but you see what used to be here was this beautiful like pocket window with a seat. And again, this leaded glass, these built-in shelves, this another beautiful fireplace, more leaded glass, just gorgeous. And they just shredded it. They just took it all out, got rid of every detail, and put in all new molding and new windows, everything. I'm assuming that all of the original details went to a historic salvage company. This stuff is worth a lot of money. We're in New Jersey, so people are not unaware of how much money this stuff is worth. I assume they got a lot of money for it from the salvage company, and it was then repurposed somewhere. That's my assumption. This room totally fascinated me. This was the office of the grandfather, and you walked in. It was a small room right before you got off the kitchen, right outside the staircase, and there's a desk here. Always reminded me of like the JFK desk in the White House, and a table and these chairs and all of these books, and there was a photo of Abraham Lincoln over here, and I just remembered thinking like this is where that person came to work at home back in the 20s and the 30s. And it very much felt like the 20s and 30s in there. And you look at it today, and this is they made it into a dining room, which, quite frankly, that makes sense if you look at the layout of the house. But it used to be these two windows back here, and they tore out the wall. I don't know what was in this room. I wasn't allowed in that room. It was some kind of room up front here. So they tore down the wall and made it a large dining room. You know, that's what it is. This is the original kitchen with the original stove of some sort, and they basically tore down all kinds of walls here. There used to be like a butler pantry in here, and it's made up one huge thing here. They moved where I think this was the basement door here. They moved that. This goes to the front. So they've made a lot of changes. So all of this has me thinking of before and after, of this idea that when you look at before, we have a real sentimentality about things. It's not hard to look at the before of what we're in right now, a couple weeks ago, and feel very sentimental at the freedom that we had, the worries that we did not have, the harrowing concerns that we go through right now weren't as present, or at least a year ago they weren't, let's say. And as I think about the before and after, this idea of how every day we get to choose how we create. If you create in this time period, if you don't, it's this idea of you get to change and evolve how you create. Our lives have changed so much in the last month that it's a reminder that you have this power to change how you write, how you create, how you share. That's a choice that we get to make each moment of each day. And as I thought about this house and the metaphor and the idea before and after, probably like you, I felt very sentimental. I felt that something was lost in the renovation of this home. I felt that when this fifth generation moved out and sold it off, that, well, we lost that history. I was toured through the home with the grandson. He was in his, I'll say his late 50s, maybe his mid 60s. We go through the first floor, second floor, third floor. We get to the final room, and he opens up the door, and there's a family in there. It is his son, his son's wife, and his grandchild. And they're all shoved in this large room upstairs, third floor, that has its own makeshift kitchen, its own beds, its own couch, its own TV. And in this one third floor room, they're all living. And they were so lovely. They were, oh, please come. We made rice and beans. Please have some. They were just so lovely. And it was funny because as I'm going through the house, I'm being sucked into history. And you're going back in time and back in time and back in time. And you get to that third floor and you're shocked into the present, to this young family, to the fifth generation, not the first generation who lived here. And of course, having a child there, and, they're just full of life. And it was such a jarring and interesting way to end that tour. And something that I looked at and noticed as I toured this home was the decay. the home didn't get this way because it was a museum being preserved. It got this way because it was being let go of. So this idea that everywhere you looked, you saw decay. There were wires strung everywhere trying to get electricity from one room to another. You had all those like really old light switches, like original light switches. The plaster everywhere was decaying and falling down and cracked. The floors were really worn through. You'd look into a dark corridor and see an old bathroom at the end with a clawfoot tub, but just water stains everywhere. Like, they'd stopped using that room decades ago. And you felt a sense of neglect. You became really aware that within these walls is probably rotting lead pipes, ancient knob and tube wiring, that the heating system was probably original or close to original. That, you don't know what you're going to find. And you really do get a sense that if a new owner is taking this over, that there's no way to just kind of patch things up. You have to get into the walls to look at the wires and redo the wires, to redo the water pipes, to think about, a house this big probably may need central air. You can't just easily throw a bunch of window units in here and heat and cool a house that is, I don't know, however many thousand square feet. Or maybe they put that in and it was done in a janky, weird way. And you see all these electrical wires and you start empathizing with the fact that whoever the new owner is, who spent a lot of money on this house, it was not going to be a small feat to bring it back. It wasn't going to be, we're going to put in a couple $100,000. Whoever had bought this and redid it, to me, I think it's easily they put in whatever, $1 million, more than $1 million. I know what it sold for before and what it sold for after, and it was certainly priced as though they did, and looking at it, I think they did too. And that's even before we get to the idea of, is there mold? Is there mildew? Is there stuff like that lurking underneath? And I don't know. And what I thought about here was this idea that there is a before and after, and that even though everything in me saw the old version of the house and wanted to preserve it, I wasn't about to put the $2 million into the house to do that. And the thing that mattered to me is not just the empty rooms or the structure. There are, in that one town alone, there's hundreds and hundreds of houses like that one. What really grabbed me was the story. It was the idea of 5 generations living in this house. It was that enough was left for me to walk into that office for the grandfather and almost imagine him walking in right behind me to go deal with the stock market crash of 1929, to imagine someone in that kitchen in 1932 cooking dinner, to imagine being in that dining room in 1948 and serving dinner, of the man who gave me the tour, who again is probably in his mid-60s, to imagine him running up the staircase to read one of those books on the shelf, one of those 50-year-old books that were sort of dangling everywhere. There was I guess books don't dangle, but this book does. There was a photo of a 1941 newspaper just sitting on the floor. And you just had such a sense of connection to story. And to me, that's what this was. I think that's what the most valuable part of this house to me was. It was that story. And I think that all of us being in transition right now, we are jarred by the sense of before and after and the sense of unknown. We're shocked at how every little thing we do is changed. And we do not know what the next hour brings, let alone the next day or week or month or year. We just have no idea. And it's very easy to go to a place where it can go to very terrifying and very real consequences. And of course, many people are living with that right now. But as I think about that connection between before and after and what is lost in that process, I'm also thinking about the choice that we each get to make each and every day about how we create in how we share. And I look at the idea that what comes out of this as well is the stories. If you're a writer or you're an artist, that is something that you are a master of, or you are a student of, we can say. This idea of evolving how you change and how you create and how you grow and how you capture these stories that you want to tell and share. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for indulging me in this story. This house has been a bit of an obsession of mine. It was really great to revisit it and share the story with you in this very unusual time. I hope you and your loved ones are safe and well. Thank you.